none of the stuff. This is a pure thought experiment, okay? But I think it's on a topic that you will find very timely and very relevant, and hopefully it'll be a fun talk for you. All right. Okay, so all of you have had the experience of perhaps going to the parking lot or going to the coffee machine, a water cooler, something, running into, or the elevator, running into somebody you haven't seen in a long time. And you say hello, you have a quick conversation, you discover that they're doing something really cool that's relevant to you. Or you hear a piece of information that you didn't know about that actually matters, like a new funding source or a new corporate matter that actually affects you. So serendipity is the act of receiving information that is valuable without actually asking for it. And it turns out that this simple phenomena plays a tremendously important role in so many aspects of work life as well as personal life. And in 18 months of COVID-induced work from home, we've been able to do many things. We've been able to get work done via Zoom. We've been able to use our remote data sources perfectly fine. This we've not been able to replicate. One of the biggest proponents, fans of serendipity, which is this phenomenon, was Steve Jobs. And this is a direct quote from his biography in his book about Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Basically saying, look, serendipity is not the kind of thing that you can capture in email or Zoom or whatever the Apple iChat equivalents are. It's the kind of thing that happens by physically running into somebody, striking up a conversation, and then that leads to something really cool. And Steve Jobs put his money where his mouth was. So this massive building in Cupertino was built and completed around 2018, okay? 2 years before COVID hit. Specifically designed to increase the chances of random interactions of the kind that we're talking about. And unfortunately, as of today, as far as I know, Apple has not yet issued the call for people to come back to work in person. Google, I believe, has said that you have to be back in April, is that right? Something like that, but not Apple. About 4 months ago, October, 6 months ago now, there was a paper published, which is actually quite influential. The researchers at Microsoft and a number of collaborators listed on this paper studied interaction patterns between workers at Microsoft before and after COVID. They had advanced knowledge of, in normal circumstances, which employees normally worked remotely. So it was a controlled, unintended controlled experiment showing how interaction patterns changed. It's a very interesting paper, detailed paper, well worth reading. Here's the key takeaway message. This is the one thing to remember. It basically says that firm-wide, company-wide, the collaboration network of workers became more static and siloed. So you got work done with your coworkers, perfectly fine with Zoom and all those things. What changed were the serendipitous events. Minor, many of them may have been trivial, but some of them may have been momentous. That constant flow of serendipitous events in your life are actually crucial because they form a type of asynchronous communication. They cause employees to be a bit more aware of what's going on in the company and of things outside the immediate work group that are actually important. So this is a pretty significant finding, barely 6 months old. It's one of the effects of work from home without the opportunity for serendipitous interaction. Now, on the flip side, people have discovered if I don't commute half an hour, whatever it is in the Bay Area or New York, I have an entire hour every day. People with small children have found it easier to do work-life balance. And of course, not driving your cars, especially if they're gasoline powered, certainly good for the planet. So there's a flip side to this whole business of working from home. And this leads to the obvious question. Could we retain these benefits of remote work, but somehow recreate opportunity for serendipitous interactions? How could we do it? And what would it look like? The important insight is that in 2022, we have all kinds of building blocks. We have edge computing, we have high bandwidth, low latency wireless, we have face recognition, all kinds of video analytics. You heard all the papers today. Is there a way to please put them together so that instead of just having scheduled Zoom meetings, I can have serendipitous Zoom interactions? Okay, what form would it take? And how might you implement it? And what would such a system throw up that becomes serious challenges? So let's walk through an imaginary interaction. Here's Alice. Alice is waiting for the elevator. And as always, the elevators are slow. She hears a gentle chime and she turns around. And on a large display on the wall, she sees Bob. Bob is a dear friend, co-worker in the same company. She hasn't seen him in many months, maybe a year. He works at a different site, but they're good friends. They worked together in the past. And he sees on his display, on the display next to the coffee machine, a chime and sees Alice. And so they wave at each other, they start talking, and it's great. It's like an impromptu Zoom session that just happened. Now, there are bystanders. Notice that black blob there? That black blob is actually a person who's been blacked out by the system. During the time they're talking, random people come in front, catch the elevator, head upstairs, people emerge from the elevator, they're all blacked out. You can't see who they are, you don't know what they're doing. You do know they're people because they seem to move, they're about the size of people, but other than that, you don't know anything. After a few minutes of conversation, it's pretty clear that there's something really worth discussing in greater depth. They said, okay, let's set up a Zoom call. And Alice heads off to her meeting, Bob gets his coffee, heads back to work. Now, this is the kind of interaction you would have in in-person settings that we don't get, that we have not had in the past 2 years of COVID. The question is, how would one build a system that would have this kind of behavior? So here is a design. There are many variants in the implementation. I'll mention some of them. I'm sure that many of you can come up with additional ways to implement this. The point is not which one is the best, that's a future question to ask. But the key point is, this is actually possible, right? So here's the basic idea. You have regions of physical space, could be this lobby area here, could be the area in front of the coffee machine, in front of the elevator, etc. And we call these things free zones. They're clearly marked. People know that this area is covered with a video camera. There are microphones in here. So what they say is audible and what they do is visible. With each free zone is associated a cloudlet, an edge computing node, close enough, connected via high bandwidth, low latency lines so that all of the audio, video, and other signals can be processed in near real time. The whole purpose of this processing is to provide situational awareness, right? Robert is in this free zone. He doesn't look like he's doing anything. He doesn't have a smartphone out. There's nobody standing next to him. He doesn't have a frown on his face. You know, maybe he's open for a serendipitous interaction at this moment. So the extraction of knowledge of this kind is what this provides. In real time, knowledge extracted from all these cloudlets is interpreted by a master cloudlet, which uses some knowledge of the organization, the past interactions of this person, their friends, their contact lists, etc., and generates the triggers that lead to serendipitous interactions. Now, you can imagine many implementation variants. If I have a smartwatch, I can opt in or opt out based on that. You can imagine avoiding use of face recognition, right? So there's a trade-off between lowering the friction and making it seamless to use and more natural versus the privacy controls. And so there's a big area to address here. I mentioned denaturing, the blacking out of data. You can do this at many levels. Just remove all faces. You could recognize faces and selectively remove them. You could even remove sensitive actions. People shaking hands is okay, but if they're doing more intimate, leave it out. And I'm not going to go through the details of this graph, but in previous work, we've shown that doing this fast enough at full frame rate is actually possible. What it solves is it solves the bystander problem, which has always been a big problem. You only now have to worry about the principles involved. Denaturing of the video in real time allows you to eliminate all non-participants for the purposes of privacy control. A final thought, I gave you the example of where Alice and Bob are actually working at the same company. Today, hybrid work arrangements like WeWork and Saks Fifth Avenue is collaborating with WeWork to convert old abandoned Fifth Avenue buildings into temporary workspaces. So people go to work, but they only go to work to a neighboring WeWork location. So you can imagine in an area the size of the Bay Area, people's commutes are now 5 minutes instead of 45 minutes. You still go to work, it's not just living at home, you still interact, but you have the opportunity to have serendipitous interactions along the lines I just described. There are diverse stakeholders here. The physical space is owned by one group of people, the free zone might be owned by another, the company knows the knowledge graph about which organization you belong to, which department, all that stuff. And of course, the employees decide whether they actually want to participate in this. So, and finally, there are bystanders. So figuring out the privacy implications and sorting them out is actually quite a tricky problem in this space. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a lot of these details, but there are a lot of HCI issues, social issues. In real life, people have exquisite protocols to avoid being embarrassed in public. And emulating them in a setting like this is actually going to be quite hard. So closing thoughts, serendipity is an extraordinarily valuable capability, and we've missed it. Some kind of post-COVID reshaping of work is going to happen. There's just no doubt about this. Whether we can make serendipity possible in those alternative work arrangements is the big question. And I believe the answer is yes. And a sweet spot here may be this notion of WeWork-like locations, which are work, not home, but they're separate from one big gigantic location as shown in the first picture. Thank you.